morning and welcome to Rising. We are back with some new content, just 2 more shows before we end this year, 2024, and head on to 2025. I am joined again by Niall. How was your holiday, my friend?
My holidays were excellent. I was in Ireland, I was in London, a little bit of trouble at airports, but otherwise enjoyable. And yourself?
I had a great Christmas, actually. I was back in the Detroit area visiting my father, and now here we are, back at the desk, ready to discuss the news.
Here we are, raring to go. So, Robby, what's on your radar?
Well. While we were all enjoying Christmas and other holiday traditions, a disagreement broke out on social media between 2 factions of the MAGA movement. One faction is the libertarian tech right, my side, led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, which supports the H-1B visa program, a program that facilitates high-skilled immigration, which is a major boon for the tech industry. Now, the other faction, represented by Steve Bannon and Laura Loomer, is the more nationalist and restrictive right, which favors reducing not just illegal immigration, but also legal immigration policies like the visa program, so as to create more employment opportunities for American workers, even if it's more expensive for the tech companies themselves. Now, this debate started after Trump named Sriram Krishnan, a venture capitalist and popular tech podcaster, to be an advisor on AI policy. Krishnan was born in India and moved to the U.S. through a visa program, different program. Krishnan is not a particularly controversial person, but nevertheless, the appointment was met with derision from Loomer and Bannon, who accused Trump of selling out the movement and siding with tech oligarchs who want to import workers from other countries. Now, some in their cohort even said that Trump is being manipulated or puppet mastered by Elon. And the mainstream media loves that narrative. Why? Because liberals in the media want to drive a wedge between Elon and Trump. They know that this partnership has been very successful for the Republican Party and will continue to be so. They want to promote the idea that there's trouble in paradise, that Musk is wearing out his welcome, and that Trump is going to eject Elon from his orbit. They think, without Elon, Trump will be more manic and ultimately more ineffective. That's why you see so many fact-free articles like this. Trump bristles at Musk's rocketing profile, says CNN. Friendship timeline, why Musk and Trump could drift apart, says Axios. Elon Musk's biggest conflict is with Donald Trump, says Reuters. Democrats are playing the exact same game as the mainstream media, of course. They want Trump and Elon to fight. But guess what? Sorry to disappoint you, Democrats, but the Trump-Elon bromance is continuing. After days of fighting about the issue on social media, Trump told the New York Post he agrees with Musk on the visas. Trump said he supports visas for high-skilled immigrants, saying, quote, "I've always liked the visas. I've always been in favor of the visas. That's why we have them. I have many H-1B visas on my properties. I've been a believer in H-1B. I have used it many times. It's a great program." Trump evidently understands that in order to be America first, America has to be strong, and to be strong, it needs high-skilled immigrants. That doesn't mean immigrants should get priority or benefit from favorable policies that unfairly punish the native-born Americans. Musk, in fact, supports reforming the program so that companies are not incentivized to take in only foreign workers. We don't want to import everyone, and we don't want to wreck our social services with floods of illegal immigrants, but we do want the best and brightest minds working here in this country, making America a richer and more advanced place. That's good for Elon Musk, it's good for Donald Trump, it's good for you and me. But those in the MAGA coalition who want more restrictions on immigration, well, they are welcome to make their case, and they have contributed meaningfully to this discussion by exposing some unfortunate loopholes in the process that do in fact need to be addressed, as Elon concedes. This is what healthy debate looks like. As Glenn Greenwald observed, watching this conversation unfold, media liberals still can't comprehend the Trump supporters, whom they have relentlessly depicted as blindly loyal leader-worshipping fascist cult, have actual ideological and policy differences that they air. It's Democrats who march in lockstep with virtually no dissent. And as Cenk Uygur put it, I agree with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy about the H-1B visas, but I love the rebellion against them because it shows that MAGA is thinking for itself. I disagree with the right-wing populists here because I think it's awesome that the most talented engineers across the world want to come here, and I think they make us stronger because we get to take the top talent of all the other countries. That's the great advantage of being American, and we shouldn't throw it away. But this fight shows that MAGA is not a monolith, and that is a great thing. They are both right. Debate and dissent are healthy for political movements. The right is not a monolith. There is room for both the libertarian nationalists and the hardline nationalists in this coalition. and we're going to hash out our disagreements as it unfolds. But if you think Trump and Elon are about to break up any minute now, doesn't look like that to me. Sorry. So here we are. This was a really raucous debate unfolding while we were off last couple days. Lots of conversation about this on social media. We're going to talk about the details of the policy more closely, immigration, in a little bit. But what did you make of the conversation unfolding?
So first of all, I know we're going to leave the policy discussion until a little bit later, but I do think we have to say at the outset, Trump's argument that he has always liked the visas simply isn't true. In 2016, he proposed getting rid of these visas. Now, we'll get into the pros and cons of that for a second. I do think it is good to have frank debates, and there is a genuine difference of opinion here, as you laid out, between the more restrictionist nationalistic side and the more, however you want to characterize it, libertarian or just generally wanting people to come here who have these special skills. I guess the point that I would make, not really differing, but putting the emphasis in a different place is, this is has not been some very high-minded, let us ponder the merits of this policy debate. I mean, Elon tweeting that people should go and F yourself in the face to his critics.
A reference to a terrific movie, Tropic Thunder, which probably many in the audience have seen, when Tom Cruise's character hangs up on the people holding Derek Zoolander hostage. I'm switching movies, and says that.
Okay.
It's a terrific line delivery.
I did not catch the movie reference.
So good.
But nonetheless, I mean, that's the kind of level we're at here. Steve Bannon pushing back, calling Elon Musk a toddler, suggesting that people should look after his wellness or have a wellness check on him following those debates. Laura Loomer goes on Bannon's podcast. She makes this direct appeal to the President-elect of the United States to help get her blue check mark back, which was taken away from her by Elon Musk, she says wrongly. It's interesting to me from a very different perspective, my very different political perspective, looking at Laura Loomer making, I think, legitimate criticisms. I mean, I dislike Laura Loomer for all the reasons you would expect me to dislike her, but suggesting that Musk is sort of, this idea that he's a free speech absolutist is just a kind of pose, and that he's perfectly willing to punish people who express views with which he disagrees.
I didn't look at the details of her specific case or grievances closely enough to determine whether I think she's right. I will say, yes, similarly, I'm not the biggest Laura Loomer fan. I think I've criticized her many times on the show, but the losing the check mark, that kind of thing, the defense given for it was that she was engaged in doxing of Krishnan by publicizing some kind of information about him, but she said, well, that's publicly available information. Yes, I was also not persuaded that she was not being retaliated against, and so even though I disagree with her, I think you ought to be careful there, especially if you've staked out commitments to free speech as Elon has. Again, I'm very much in the Elon camp of this debate, but yes, we've got to be careful not to just silence people who disagree with you, and if it looked like a little bit of the thumb being placed on the scale, but I didn't follow the specific, if she did violate some policy, then that's fine, but I think the pro-Loomer faction was saying, well, there's all sorts of people who've also publicized this information. It's not private information, so, what are you saying here?
Right. I also think it is interesting. I mean, Bannon, as tends to be the case with him, seems to be loving the conflict of it all, telling Elon to bring it and all of this. But there is, beyond that, a really interesting argument going on here, where Bannon is basically making the argument that this is just about very wealthy people taking advantage of the law or taking advantage of the visa program to disadvantage native-born Americans, and furthermore to get people at lower wages. We'll get into that at a later segment, but it is, to my mind, interesting that there's such a direct and substantive split between the if you want to say nativist or nationalistic wing and the Elon Vivek wing.
Right, which my wing
Your
appears
wing.
to be winning for the moment. That's a new sensation for me in the realm of politics, but I'll take it for as long as it lasts. We've got lots more to discuss today on Rising. Obviously, former President Jimmy Carter passed away yesterday, so we'll share our thoughts on his legacy and get into all sorts of other topics. Stay with us. President Joe Biden delusional? Biden and some of his aides told the Washington Post that if he had stayed in the 2024 race, he could have beaten President-elect Donald Trump. The Post reports that Biden and these aides have told people in recent days he could have defeated Trump, according to people familiar with their comments who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe private conversations. Aides say the president has been careful not to place blame on Harris or her campaign. End quote. Again, that's from the Washington Post. Biden's poor poll numbers and disastrous debate performance sparked concern over the summer. This led to top Democrats essentially forcing him out of the race. Here's Biden basically admitting that in a CBS interview in August.
But what happened was a number of my Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate thought that I was going to hurt them in the races. And I was concerned if I stayed in the race, that would be the topic. You'd be interviewing me about why did Nancy Pelosi say, why did so, and I thought it'd be a real distraction.
Meanwhile, Democratic Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal told the Post that Biden had cut against the concept of him being a transitional president by seeking re-election. Quote, Biden ran on the promise that he was going to be a transitional president and, in effect, have one term before handing it off to another generation, Blumenthal said. I think his running again broke that concept, the conceptual underpinning of the theory that he would end the Trump appeal, he would defeat Trumpism and enable a new era.
Many Democrats blame Biden for Harris's loss since he dropped out of the race so late. Biden's aides also said his old-school governing style didn't mix well with today's political climate. Yeah. His national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, for instance, said the president has been operating on a time horizon measured in decades, while the political cycle is measured in 4 years. He's kind of saying the Bene Gesserit line from Dune, our plans are measured in centuries.
I mean, can I just pick up that point very
sure.
quickly? Because this argument that Jake Sullivan is making, which is, oh, over time it will come to seem to be a great presidency, the policy with which Jake Sullivan is most identified, which is the policy in Gaza, I think will look ever more catastrophic and indefensible as time goes by, because I think it has been the great moral failing of the Biden presidency. Anyway.
I think that's probably a good guess. The idea that Biden was going to win if he stayed in is just, I guess you can't totally dismiss a counterfactual like that. We'll never know what would have happened had Biden stayed in the race, but the most likely thing is Trump would have won an even more crushing victory. That's what all the polling suggested. The polling, if anything, has now underrated Trump somewhat in three sequential elections, most dramatically in 2020, even though he did lose. The polling was so wildly off in Biden's favor, and then this time it was just slightly a little bit off in Kamala's favor. The idea that Biden was going to win is kind of laughable. I mean, they're not putting their names to that statement. These are anonymous aides saying, "Oh yeah, we would have done so good." It was also mostly the same team in place. It was the same people running the campaign, and so I appreciate he doesn't want to bash Harris too much, but he should be bashing himself. He put her in a very difficult situation that she did not significantly improve upon, but here we are.
No, here we are indeed. I mean, I do take the argument at some level that people do consider President Biden fundamentally a decent enough person, but his great flaw politically, it seems to me, is a kind of mix or stew of pride and ego, and these tend to lead him into terrible decisions. So the point that Blumenthal made there on the record, I think, is an obviously correct point, that Biden was elected, oldest president elected in history when he won the office in the first place. And the whole idea was he was the person who was going to stop Trump first time around. He was the reassuring older white guy, not very left-wing, had been kind of center-left all his political career. He would stop Trump and then he would make way for someone else. He then decided that he was somehow uniquely capable of defeating Trump again. He and his aides clearly tried to play down any loss of cognitive ability until that was left on raw and horrendous display during that debate, after which the Democratic Party realized that Biden was almost certainly going to lose. So this idea that after that is all over, you turn around and say, oh, well, I would have beaten him, really. There is no empirical evidence for that at all.
And his decision to stay in and run again is easier to defend, I guess, if the cognitive decline, the collapse was abrupt and sudden and very late in the cycle. But what we're hearing from reporting from the Wall Street Journal and other places now is that this was ongoing for much of the presidency, gaps in awareness that became greater as they went on. I'm going to have more to say about this in a Radar for tomorrow, but this is the great fiction of the Biden administration, that he was good to go and then suddenly there was some collapse at the end. There are now serious questions, I think, throughout his presidency of his ability to make important, to react in the moment to things that were happening. And so the idea that he should have sought a second term, given that he was already having problems from the inception of his presidency, that now seems just criminal. I mean, not literally criminal, but in terms of a moral crime of trying to pretend that this person was, yes, uniquely qualified when he was not even. There were serious questions about his ability to do the job from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the decline appeared to accelerate. I think that is certainly true. But I also think a lot of Democrats would share the critique that you and I are making, which is that by staying in the race, there was a whole waterfall of effects from that. He stayed in to the point where it was obviously only really going to be Kamala Harris who could replace him, as opposed to an open primary where another candidate could have emerged. She had 107 days for her campaign. Maybe she would have lost anyway, who knows? But it put her in a difficult position, and it put the party in a position where it realistically couldn't choose anyone other than her. And I think a lot of Democrats look back on that with considerable anger.
Right. If he had cleared out of the way earlier, you would have had time to find out if Democratic primary voters actually want Kamala Harris or someone else. You would have had more opportunity to make her case, which could have been to her benefit, or if it turns out, she really doesn't have a vision to sell. People were never so in love with this political figure to be the leader of the Democratic Party, and there would have been times for other people to make their cases. Some of these popular governors of must-win states for the Democratic Party could have made their cases because it's exactly as you say, because it was so late, it was really going to be Kamala, and she didn't have much time to do anything with that. Biden is, leaving office as a transitional figure, a transition back to Trump, transitioned away from Trump and back to Trump. His legacy in the moment is certainly not going to be very, very good. He can hope for, we're going to talk about Jimmy Carter in a minute, who just passed away, who is, I think, getting, when you pass away, people try to say positive things, and I even, frankly, do have a few positive things to say about Jimmy Carter, so maybe one day that will come for Joe Biden as well, but I don't know.
I think any one-term president always has a bit of a stench of failure around them. I think if Trump had lost this year, that stench of failure from 2020 would have clung to him. Now he's in this very different, almost unique, barring Grover Cleveland, position of the non-consecutive terms. I don't anticipate Biden running again in 2028 to try to replicate that, although I know it's a scenario that amuses you.
Grover Cleveland is actually one of my favorite presidents. He's a beloved president among libertarians.
Really?
So, yes. Very limited government Democrat, wanted a humble foreign policy, low taxes, low regulation, leave people alone. There's a lot of lessons we could live from the humble tenure of Grover Cleveland.
And a great name to boot.
And a great name. All right, we'll be back with more Rising in just a minute. Stay tuned. Former President Jimmy Carter passed away on Sunday at the age of 100. Carter lived longer than any U.S. president. Elected in 1977, the 39th president of the United States would go on to serve just one term. Marring his tenure was stagflation, an economic downturn with high inflation and slow growth. But what tarnished his presidency most was the Iran hostage crisis in 1979. Now, he was never able to escape from the shadow of the 444-day event in which 52 Americans were held captive in an embassy in Tehran. Making matters worse was a failed rescue attempt. President Carter ordered 8 helicopters in, but sandstorms and mechanical problems failed the mission, killing 8 Americans. Carter sent shockwaves prior to being elected when he admitted having feelings of lust and committing, quote, adultery many times in my heart in a 1976 interview with Playboy.
The Carter presidency did have some major successes in the international arena. He was revered for brokering peace between Israel and Egypt at Camp David in 1978. He was also known for championing human rights, expanding the national park system, and restoring some credibility to the nation after the Watergate scandal. But in 1980, he lost by a landslide to Ronald Reagan. Carter's post-political life had arguably even bigger achievements. He and his wife Rosalind Carter founded the Carter Presidential Center in 1982, devoted to issues relating to democracy and human rights. He also spent years working for Habitat for Humanity, building housing for underprivileged people.
So, the Carter legacy
Yeah.
is something to discuss. Carter is not considered super favorably or positively by presidential historian rankings type things. I have my beef with those ranking systems because there's actually like a combat bonus. Like it correlates often with how many Americans you got killed in overseas wars is how positively historians rank your presidency. There is nothing wrong with being humble and not involving American troops overseas and keeping government spending relatively constrained, in my view. There's actually some positive things to say about Carter, even from a libertarian perspective on all those things, even though he's remembered for being a kind of progressive figure. He's been very, very vocally progressive in his post-presidency, but he did do airline deregulation of some other industries, non-military spending. His record on non-military spending was lower than his 5 most recent predecessors. He didn't explode the budget deficit as much as even some Republicans did at the time. And as I said, he got fewer Americans killed overseas than just about any president of the last half century at that time. So there are some kind things you can say about him, even though he's not favorably remembered. I think he's remembered as a bit of a kind of a, the assistant principal at the school, eat your vegetables, don't leave the lights on past midnight, that kind of, we got to conserve and save, sort of scolding attitude is something that he is not well liked over.
Yeah, I think Carter really struggled with the fact that there are performative elements to being president of the United States, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is the most powerful elected office in the world. I think people expect the person inhabiting that office to have a degree of sort of natural authority, and I think Jimmy Carter kind of struggled with that, the sort of cardigan wearing, rather low-key, carrying his own luggage onto Air Force One. All of that stuff was a problem. Now, there are achievements, and we alluded to some of them in the introduction. I think the Camp David Accords are and were a really significant achievement for him. People on the more left or liberal side of things would talk about the fact that he had a cognizance of climate change and environmental issues before that was popular. He, for example, created or installed solar panels in the White House itself. And also he did play a part in diversifying the judiciary and other federal offices and appointed many more women and many more African Americans to those kind of roles than had been the case previously. To me, Carter, it is the old cliche of the Napoleon phrase about preferring to have lucky generals than good ones. He was unlucky with some stuff as well. The energy crisis that wasn't really his doing erupted and marred his presidency massively. You mentioned the Iranian hostage crisis, and that terrible catastrophe where the rescue mission went awfully wrong. Again, not really something that was his fault, but it's just such a humiliation for the United States that it was obviously going to rebound badly on him.
Yeah, we expect our presidents to have this vision and deliver what the nation is going to look like and have this formulated ideology or slogan. Reagan had that in spades. The president who comes in after Jimmy Carter wins the biggest landslide for his reelection that we haven't had one since and probably never will again because the country is so divided. And Carter was a humble man, was not someone prone to giving these speeches. It really came off poorly in the debates he did with Reagan. He himself feeling kind of outmatched and that he didn't have a competing presence to offer America. But you know, as someone who wants government to be a little bit more humble, do a little bit less, particularly on the international scale, where you and I agree more often, I think that's fine. And you're right that he did get a little bit unlucky. You know, I'm seeing when you pass away, people try to find nice things to say about you. I'm not seeing like thunderous condemnations or denunciations from conservatives. And in fact, I see conservatives making some of the points I'm making, that some of the positive economic things that we would argue that took place under the Reagan administration actually were initiated and started by Carter. It's kind of like your successor sometimes gets the credit for things because when those plans come to fruition, but they did really start under Carter. I think most people agree that he was an honest man. He was not a corrupt man. He didn't try to enrich himself through government. He was actually, you know, he was coming on the heels of a number of corruption scandals in politics, and so that's all good.
Yeah, no, I mean, he definitely was an antidote to the kind of Watergate era and all the stuff that had been uncovered about Nixon. It's also just, at risk of stating the completely obvious, it just struck me watching some of the footage of him, just how long ago it was that he was president. Like, it was sort of the era of kind of
the 70s.
70s, Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show making jokes, you know, that kind of very different era.
The 70s is just no one's favorite era, is what I've concluded.
That is true, although I do think Johnny Carson was great, but that's a whole separate issue. But I do think that partly because he had such a long post-presidency, that is often the thing that people focus on as being more to his credit. The Carter Center working on election monitoring, on a lot of public health issues, almost completely eradicating a very damaging parasite that had hit the developed world a lot, and just generally working for peace. That's why he got the Nobel Peace Prize in the end. Perhaps a bit of a rebuke to then President George W. Bush when he got it in 2002, but nonetheless a recognition of some of his international work.
He did live a very, very long time. I think he's one of the oldest lived people to have ever served as a head of state, like in human history.
Right.
We now have, with him having passed, the two oldest people who have served as president is the incumbent and the person taking over for the incumbent, Biden and Trump. Now, interestingly enough, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush are the same age as Trump. They were all born in the same year. Trump, Clinton, George W. Bush. Trump is older than Clinton and Bush by just a couple weeks. So they're all the same age. Now, of course, Clinton and Bush served as presidencies several decades ago. So here we are.
Here we are, a vigorous, youthful country with two 70 and 80, or people in their 70s and 80s that are most recent presidents. Maybe there'll be a new dash of new blood in 4 years.
Yes, well, I hope they are as long-lived as Jimmy Carter is, but that we can bring some new, younger blood into our political system. I think that would be very beneficial. Stay tuned, more Rising right after this. There was lots of chaos earlier this month as Congress tried passing a spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. Buried in the first draft of the 1,000-page bill was long-term health care funding for 9/11 victims and first responders who have lingering health consequences. Now, after President-elect Donald Trump and Elon Musk spearheaded an effort to trim the giant, bloated bill, that funding did not make it into the final version.
Some Democrats put the blame squarely on Trump and Musk. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, for instance, told the New York Times, quote, "When Donald Trump asked Republicans to redo their budget, they heartlessly discarded the 9/11 health fund." New York Congressman Jerry Nadler also jumped in, telling the Times that, quote, "the survivors who have enough problems don't want to have to roam the halls of Congress every year."
Trump's incoming press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, told the Times that Trump does look forward to working with the new Congress to ensure 9/11 first responders do get the care they need. You may recall that Daily Show host Jon Stewart was a huge advocate for giving 9/11 first responders more benefits. Here he is in 2019 appealing to Congress.
There is not a person here, there is not an empty chair on that stage that didn't tweet out, "Never forget the heroes of 9/11. Never forget their bravery. Never forget what they did, what they gave to this country." Well, here they are. Your indifference cost these men and women their most valuable commodity, time. It's the one thing they're running out of. This should be flipped. This hearing should be flipped. These men and women should be up on that stage, and Congress should be down here answering their questions.
That health fund is still alive until at least 2027. And sounds like something that Trump's people have said they will be interested in taking up, but it is not in this current funding bill.
It's not, and I think I'm probably going to have a more vigorous reaction to it than perhaps you might, coming from a different perspective. To me, what this story really is about is the dangers in taking on board the kind of sloganeering elements of, sorry, just a little background noise there, sloganeering elements of the Elon Musk idea that you must cut government massively. He wants $2 trillion cut. When the initial package that did include this funding was proposed, he described the bill as criminal. He said anyone who voted for it should be voted out of office. Now, the problem is with this very vigorous or militant anti-government rhetoric that has become very commonplace here, it just obscures the fact that there are actually things that it is important for government to do, or that government can do well. There are 130,000 people in this program. 30,000 of them or so suffer from cancer. It provides them with free health care for certified conditions that were a consequence of 9/11. That is a completely legitimate thing for government to do. It is a worthy thing for government to do, and it's just got sort of kiboshed, for the moment at least, as a consequence of this kind of Musk sloganeering rhetoric.
Yeah, we do disagree a little bit, although I would say I don't know the details of this specific policy, inside and out. Maybe this is a very valid use of public funds. Maybe this is narrowly tailored to address the needs of a very sympathetic group of people who sacrificed for us, for the country, on a day of great need, and we should be doing more for them. I'm totally open to that argument. I certainly hope the Trump administration does revisit this issue, and if appropriate, authorize additional funding or authorize it till the end of time. There are some things the government needs to spend money on, sure. I will say, and this might be not well received, but I don't like being emotionally blackmailed by Jon Stewart or anyone else into just we pound our fists on the desk and scream 9/11 to do more government spending. We have to be thoughtful. We have to decide whether this program works. I remember interviewing Senator Rand Paul on the show previously when he has objected. I don't know if it was specifically to funding for this. I think it was for some other health-related military consequences for people, and he said that he worries that these programs get flooded by people who should not actually qualify and creates lawsuits and that sort of thing. Again, I don't know that that's specifically the case here. I am open to hearing the argument. If we should fund it more aggressively, we should fund it more aggressively. But inserting it into this, I would argue, massively bloated rush spending bill that no one actually even has time to read, we need to do things more thoughtfully. We need to consider the merits of individual spending proposals, and we need to make fundamental, and I'm sure you agree with this, fundamental reforms to our healthcare system, so we're not paying so much for healthcare. But that's true for everyone, not one specific narrow category of admittedly sympathetic people.
No, well, I disagree with quite a lot of that, particularly the idea. I just don't think that it is fair or decent, really, to say that it is emotional blackmail, to say that people who are suffering, in many cases, life-threatening conditions, and possibly, well, in the case of cancer, obviously a potentially fatal condition, those people should be taken care of. These are people who have been medically verified as suffering the most severe health consequences possible for their service to this country on one of the bleakest days in this country's history. It is not emotional blackmail to make an argument that what I have just described should be part of the consideration. And as to the point about general government spending, to be slightly macabre about it, a 9/11 related fund is going to have an end point, because regardless of whether those people die prematurely or not, there will come a time when there are no people left who were alive on 9/11. Sure. So it is going to end at a certain point. And you can make the argument, sure, about bloated government funding, but there was also in that bill $190 million for, this is separate from 9/11, for research into pediatric cancers. It was stripped out by the House. The Senate resurrected it as a separate bill. But those are the kind of things that are obviously valid and obviously important that get kind of wiped out by an excessive or overly general opposition to government, to the idea that big government.
Well, fine. Well, then I want to hear more examples from people advocating spending of those things to what they are going to cut, because we're massively in debt. The government spends more and more every year. So where are the areas where we will draw down? If this is the most important, well, I support drawing down there too, and in a bunch of other places, and getting rid of all of this. I mean, pork barrel spending on people's districts and funding for it. That sounds like good research that we should be funding. There's also research on, I see, because again, Rand Paul does this every year where he shows all the little experiment, like cats running on treadmills, things of that nature. Anthony Fauci's experiments on dogs that I find to be horribly unethical, as do many, in fact, progressives. Ryan Grimm used to go on tirades about the specifically Fauci dog funding. So fine. Well, I hope we have that conversation, and maybe this is the really important thing, But when you are, taking from a general fund, this isn't magic money that we can wave a wand and say, we're going to take care of this. This comes from public funding, taxpayer dollars, and so what we,
but
there can't be an obligation.
You make those arguments as if the fact that it comes from taxpayer dollars just means, like, none of it should be spent. There are genuine things that it is appropriate and fitting for government to do. And the danger with an overly dogmatic approach, I understand that
government is us,
but we have social obligations to people who have served the nation and have suffered enormous health consequences from that. It is us, but there is an us that exists. There is a society that exists that has responsibilities to take care of people.
I'm not disagreeing with that in a moral sense, but I think it is always very easy to say there is an obligation for us as part of this collective to take care of some other. You can be incautious with other people's money. We're paying it as taxpayers too, but it's diffused across a lot of people, and say there's some obligation to do that when there's a finite pool of resources. Right. That's the task of government, is determining how to allocate this finite pool of resources and get the most value out of it. And maybe this is again, I'm not specifically inveighing against it, but it needs to be approached thoughtfully like anything else, and not just, I really don't like the how dare you can't even think about this attitude from the 9/11 hit the table people.
I don't think people who were on top of those piles of rubble in 9/11 should be made financially to suffer because of the healthcare needs that they have.
No. You let us know what you think about this topic, and we'll be back with more Rising right after this. President-elect Donald Trump hasn't taken office yet, but he's already making some pretty bold statements. He's talking about buying Greenland, retaking control of the Panama Canal, and making Canada our 51st state.
Trump has emphasized how he wants to keep the US out of foreign wars. During his first term, though, he was aggressive in promoting America's interests on the world stage.
Now Trump's team is saying that his latest posture is part of a broader strategy. World leaders are flocking to the table because President Trump is already delivering on his promise to make America great again. That is Trump transition spokeswoman Anna Kelly telling the Washington Post, quote, "When he officially takes office, foreign nations will think twice before ripping off our country. America will be respected again, and the whole world will be safer."
Another spokesperson, this time anonymous, told the Post, quote, "Trump knows what levers to pull and what guardrails there are, and he's in a position of power to utilize those levers." Canada announced earlier in December that it was ramping up spending on border security. Trump's transition team said this was proof that his strategy was working. Meanwhile, former Republican Representative Carlos Corbeau of Florida told MSNBC this week that the Trump strategy could backfire.
These kinds of insults, could provoke them into a confrontation with the United States, and obviously not a military confrontation, because none of those countries could compete with us in that way. But it really does just kind of deteriorate the relations between the U.S. and other countries. And we know that can be important when it comes time to build international coalitions, when it comes time to try to sign new trade agreements. So there is a risk here, even if it's a negotiation tactic.
I don't know about that. I think Trump has already brought Trudeau to heel and actually maybe toppled Trudeau's entire government. And I don't want Canada to become the 51st state.
Glad to hear it, Robby.
Well, because
it would cost you too much money for your libertarian
it would cost the Republicans too many electoral votes.
Oh,
Let's
that's
think
right.
through this strategy for a moment.
That's right. Two more Democratic senators representing Canada.
2 more Democratic senators and a lot more electoral votes for the Democratic Party. So let's not do that. Maybe it can be a colony.
I think we don't necessarily want to
No. I don't want that.
Imperialism.
I don't want that. And I don't want to, retake Panama or we don't want to take Greenland by force if they're selling. It might make sense to buy it. What would be great is to have better trade relations with the governments that oversee these territories, have them be free trade zones where we can all benefit and America can enrich itself economically. There's a lot of energy and shipping aspects to both Panama and Greenland. Greenland, obviously, this giant landmass that is not particularly green. And if you've looked at a map from the 17th century, the Mercator projection, Greenland is the entire world because of the distortion that occurs at the poles. It's not quite that big, but it's still pretty big.
It is, but look, I think
2 people live there.
I think
if they're Republicans, then we can give Greenland some electoral votes to be fine.
Counterbalance Canada for you. Look, there's a whole big, the big picture here is there are some of these comments that Trump makes that appear ludicrous and you can actually defend them to a degree. I wouldn't always do so, but I mean, Greenland is something that Harry Truman had designs on at one stage because of its strategic importance. There is a legitimate issue about Chinese expansionism in many of these places, trying to expand its footprint and influence, and whether it's in the United States' interest to try to push back on that. Most people, including me, would say that is in America's interest. The problem is Trump just has this propensity to blurt out these things, and even if you take the generous view that they're a negotiating tactic, there is always the danger that he just gets it wrong or that he miscalculates. So tariffs on Canada and Mexico, this idea that there'd be 25% tariffs on imports from each, I think you and I, despite our other differences, both think that's a bad idea. It would raise prices on American consumers. And if it is being done as a threat, the problem is the other countries know the threat, if followed through upon, would have detrimental effects on the United States and would have detrimental effects on Trump's popularity. This is always the danger in his kind of hot-headed approach, or even this idea that, well, he's just sort of pretending to be crazy as a negotiating tactic. It is very high risk, and yes, the Panama Canal will probably not be seized back by the United States after all this time. It was Jimmy Carter who signed the treaties that passed that area back to Panama. But the overall approach of sort of hyperbole and these grandiose claims by Trump, I think does have risks.
Yeah, I mean, it's administered by Panama. Obviously, countries around the world get the advantages of the reduced shipping time for moving through it, and that's a good thing. Trump engages in a lot of bluster. I often don't agree with or don't love some of his rhetorical flourishes, but I know from the first Trump administration that the governance itself was pretty standard Republican. I would argue that, yes, while he says things that you might imagine would inflame world leaders or could lead to some kind of global insecurity, that mostly did not materialize during his first term, and it looks like world leaders are welcoming him back. I would say there has been a lot of global instability over the course of the Biden administration. Now, Biden was certainly much more rhetorically reserved, and that suits my taste just fine. But then the question becomes, and I absolutely did not think this at the beginning, but I'm coming around to this way of thought, that there just wasn't a respect or a fear of Biden that led him to be disrespected by other world leaders and allowed for some of this instability we've seen with Russia, in the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't respect Joe Biden or feels like he can do whatever he wants, and Biden will never never scold him for that. I don't know for sure that that's different with Trump, but I think it might be.
I think that there are, I mean, obviously I have lots of legitimate criticisms of Biden in foreign policy terms, not only in relation to Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians, but also, I mean, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was shambolic, and it really put a hole beneath the waterline of Biden's approval ratings that he never really recovered from. But I think that's a very different argument from saying, because Biden made mistakes, therefore Trump will be better. That is not guaranteed at all. It is equally possible that things could go off the rails with Trump in an even more dramatic fashion. Yes, he is unpredictable, but he is also somebody who I think doesn't really have much patience for thinking through these things a lot of the time. Acts at a very superficial or visceral level where certain world leaders annoy him because they don't kiss up to him as much as he would like, or have crossed him in some fashion. I worry about his just lack of thought on these matters.
Sure, he is more so this time around so far than last time, listening to people I generally like and I think might be good influences on him. You know, for instance, with illegal immigration, it's looking clearer and clearer that the deportation is actually not going to be some mass deportation, you know, send the military door to door to collect everyone, which I think would be terrible, but more limited concentration on violent criminals, which is certainly well supported by people in America to have that kind of action. The people I agree with more have won the visa fight. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. So despite the the rhetoric and the bluster, what I'm so far seeing, and it's very early, he hasn't even taken office yet, something in line with policies that I want. And I certainly want us to get more value out of places like Greenland, Panama, have a good and healthy relationship with our Canadian neighbors, be able to trade, have mutually beneficial economic arrangements, not tariffs. As you said, we don't want tariffs in place. That hurts them and hurts us. It hurts the American consumers. It will worsen prices. So I hope it just remains a threat and we work things out. But we got to give Trump some time to see how it works.
We shall see how that goes. I think it'll be a risky bit.
More rising right after this.
What a difference 8.5 years makes. When the president-elect ran the first time around, here is what he had to say about H-1B visas, those visas given to highly skilled foreign workers. Trump tweeted this out on March 4th, 2016. The H-1B program is neither high-skilled nor immigration. These are temporary foreign workers imported from abroad for the explicit purpose of substituting for American workers at lower pay. I remain totally committed to eliminating rampant, widespread H-1B abuse and ending outrageous practices such as those that occurred at Disney in Florida when Americans were forced to train their foreign replacements. The tweet went on to say, quote, "I will end forever the use of H-1B as a cheap labor program and institute an absolute requirement to hire American workers first for every visa and immigration program, no exceptions."
H-1B visas were developed to allow the brightest foreign workers, many engineers and scientists, to live and work in the U.S. Supporters of the policy say these visas are critical to keeping America a leader in AI and that all those industries depend on it. This policy is at the heart of a new battle between the tech leaders in the Donald Trump faction and the MAGA base who helped the president win the election. Let's look a little bit more closely at the policy itself. So, as I alluded to in my opening monologue for today's show, I am in the Elon Musk Vivek camp on this. I am glad that Donald Trump has evidently changed his mind. I mean, there's no way around it that he was opposed to this visa program in 2016. He has now said that he supports it. You can call him a flip-flopper if you will, but like with the TikTok ban, I didn't support what he wanted to do before, and I support what he's doing now. And at the end of the day, I want my politicians to change their minds from policies I think are bad to policies I think are good. We can certainly make changes to the visa program, so I understand from having listened to the more restriction people that these people come in and because what they're trying to do is get green cards, they can work for less and they have maybe less labor sort of power because the benefit to them coming to the country is so great, and they're not subject to some other restrictions on native-born workers who are trying to exchange their labor for value, and that's not really fair. So I am certainly open to revising that, so we're all competing on an even playing field. But the reason I am in favor of this policy overall is, as Elon and Vivek said, America needs to be a leader, not a military leader by invading every country or doing nation building or any of that stuff. I'm totally against it, but we are in a competition with China for supremacy in the next century, and I want skilled foreign-born workers to come here, provide economic benefit to our country, and then actually to remain here. I don't want them to go back, especially back to China, to take the skills and the networking that they've gathered here and then go enrich I mean, I have nothing against the country of China itself, but serve a government that is autocratic and opposed to our interests. So I think it is important to keep, for America first, to be able to benefit from high-skilled foreign labor.
So here is a very strange scenario that I find myself in this question, which is finding common ground with Steve Bannon and with Laura Loomer, which is not a position I'm accustomed to being in. But here is what I think is really interesting about the way politics is changing right now. The Bannon and even Loomer argument, really, is that this is a program that benefits oligarchs more so than it benefits regular folks. And I think that there are legitimate points to be made in support of that argument. One is the fact that the visas are specifically tied to the employer. So therefore, it just stands to reason that someone on one of those visas will be more reluctant to make a rumpus about working conditions, pay, or anything else. Then there is the separate argument where the Department of Labor insists that the people on these visas have to be paid the prevailing market wage. Now, that just doesn't seem to be true. For example, in 2017, there was a study from economists at University of San Diego and University of Michigan. They found that tech wages overall would be 5.1% higher if this program didn't exist. There have been other people making inquiries, including our friend Li Fang, who sometimes comes on with us here, about the use of this program by tech titans to specifically seek workers outside the United States, not because of exceptional ability, but because it is presumed that you can get them for lower wages and they will be more malleable because of their fragile status in this country.
Yeah,
all of those things seem completely valid criticism.
No, I think they're valid, and again, I am happy for the people who are giving voice to this argument and bringing up these issues. I think those things should be addressed. If there's one pool of potential labor that can work for less because the main benefit to them is the immigration benefit, and then another pool of labor that is actually subject to different labor-related regulations that makes their labor more expensive, and this pool is winning for that reason, then I'm totally against that. I'm against artificial interventions that are depressing the wages that these people would work for and inflating the wages that these people would work for. That said, so we should absolutely look at that and try to address that. That said, while it's certainly nice for workers to lift wages, and we should pursue government policies that can contribute to better wages, and yes, make sure that plutocrats are not sucking up all the value, we could always raise wages by putting restrictions on labor that make it more expensive for companies to hire people and just make the operations of businesses or tech businesses more difficult, and that would not be, I would argue, to the benefit of, it's not to the benefit of the companies, but it's also to the benefit of the country and to technological innovation, right?
Well,
I want to be a leader. I want to be a
there...
leader on AI and tech. I think it's important for America to be a leader on these fronts. So my end-all be-all is not making sure the wages are the highest ever if that comes at the detriment of making the company competitive on an international scale.
Yeah, but there has to be some baseline where we say it is not acceptable to treat workers in certain ways. That's why we have labor regulations at all, right? You can't, generally speaking, employ 12 and 13-year-old kids to work because we, as a society, think that's not a good idea. Robby's going to adopt the pro-child labor argument here, I can tell.
Well, let's have this out then. I don't think there's anything wrong with, I don't know at what age is the appropriate age necessarily. I don't have kids myself, but to do a summer job, to work at a McDonald's if you're in 7th and 8th grade. What is wrong with that? I don't know why the left thinks is the most horrifying idea of all time.
Let's not get distracted by the child labor debates. I think that question has been settled some time ago.
Yeah, and I think we end up with a lot of entitled people who've never worked a day in their lives. There's nothing wrong. Didn't you have an experience of doing even some difficult manual labor type job, like yard work or something at that age? I certainly did. I didn't think it was a crisis.
I come from a country that used to send children up the chimneys to clean chimneys. Like that, we decided that was a bad idea. And
we decided
against that. Yeah. We as society, Robby.
Okay.
Anyway, the point is that there is a whole argument about these visas as to whether they in fact are purely for the benefit of corporations to the detriment of American workers. Now, one can certainly make the argument that it is in the country's interest to draw talented people to the United States. I agree with that. The question is how you do that in a way that does not suppress legitimate rights that American workers have, whether that is to do with conditions or to do with pay or to do with being overly prone to manipulation by bosses.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but ultimately it's a matter of priorities, and I think the more restrictionist people are underrating the importance of having America dominate in the tech sphere in particular. Our policies, honestly, with respect to speech and the First Amendment, have made Silicon Valley the hub of technological innovation on planet Earth. Europe could never have something like this because EU bureaucrats want to attack every person who builds something for any reason, and same in other parts of the world. And so we need to, I think, protect those industries, not with protectionist policies, but with making it easy enough, not with no restrictions and with no forethought for keeping the country the same culturally or whatever the other considerations are, because that's a lot of it from the nativist perspective. And I don't mean to be using that word dismissively, because obviously I think these people have something to what they're saying, that we America is not just an idea. It's not just we can take in any number of people not from here and remain the same social character. Those are a lot of arguments they make as well. Again, I'm not dismissing all of this, but my priority is making sure the innovations we want to see in the tech space, which overlaps with important medical treatment, making us live longer, healthier lives. That progress itself is very important for our country, for people who live in our country, for the world, and that should not be left out of the conversation.
No, I agree with that. I'm just fundamentally skeptical that oftentimes, is the shortage of that level of skilled labor in the tech space really as grave as Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or other people argue, or do they have the ulterior motive of lower wages and a more manipulatable workforce? Really, is that really what it's about?
But we want to make sure we get in those Elons, those Einsteins, those people who could have had a very different life if they were trapped in their home countries, and because of the fantastic character of America and its regulatory regime and its government, we allow human flourishing.
Yes.
We want to make sure we keep that up.
Even from Ireland.
Even from Ireland, yes. We love our immigrants from Ireland here on Rising. More of our show right after this. Well, Trump took to Truth Social on Monday and endorsed Mike Johnson for Speaker of the House. He said the American people need immediate relief from all the destructive policies of the last administration. Speaker Mike Johnson is a good, hardworking, religious man. He will do the right thing, and he will continue to win. Mike has my total and complete endorsement, MAGA.
Not everyone is supportive. Indiana Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz told Fox News' Will Cain on Monday morning that there were others looking to take Johnson's spot. Here she is.
Well, listen, I think there are a lot of other people are interested, but I think they don't want at this point to go to Speaker Johnson, and I think, Speaker Johnson needs to have a serious conversation, and I hope he will be able to have that conversation, including with President Trump, and convince him, because there are a few things also he didn't deliver for President Trump, too, what he promised just recently.
So I think that's notable if you're telling us you know of other individuals in Congress who would want to put themselves up for Speaker?
Yes, they are. Of course, there's a lot of people probably, and I think that's a debate liberation we have, and I hope we have it before January 6th.
Quite a few Republicans blasted Johnson for negotiating a 1,000-page bill with Democrats earlier this month. President-elect Trump and Elon Musk ultimately spearheaded an effort to push back on that bill.
So the endorsement of Trump for Speaker Johnson is very consequential, a good thing for him, because we are hearing a lot of criticisms of him from Republicans. Now, I will say the endorsement might not be enough. Kevin McCarthy famously did enjoy the backing of Donald Trump to a considerable degree, but when push came to shove, Trump was either not involved enough in it on McCarthy's behalf for him to keep the gavel, or did not persuade enough House Republican members that they should keep him. We are seeing a cycle that has now repeated itself a couple times with the Republican speaker stuff from Boehner, Ryan, McCarthy, and now Johnson, where you have a speaker who ends up making compromises with Democrats for some mutual funding priorities, like, for instance, what keep happening with Johnson and McCarthy is Ukraine, even though many in the the more MAGA-leaning members don't want to spend money on this. So then they rebel. The speaker gets ousted. A new speaker comes in who promises things to the more hardline MAGA people, and then is unable to deliver on those promises because they have to make compromises with Democrats, and we end up in the same position. I think the best argument Mike Johnson has going for him right now is saying, well, let's just delay making the serious spending-related decisions until Trump is actually in office, and we have the congressional majority we're actually going to be working with. So we're going to punt that football one more time, and if it's really the last time, maybe that will keep the more MAGA Republicans at bay. Of course, they've heard this promise before and been betrayed every single time, so I don't blame at all the Thomas Masseys of the world for being skeptical and looking to see if there's someone else who wants the gavel. Of course, they could find themselves in the exact same circumstances. So
first things first, being the Speaker of a Republican Party in the House with a narrow majority is just a terrible job.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're trying all the time to placate both a relatively small number of Republicans who might represent Democratic-leaning or at least competitive districts, and at the same time placate the most hardline fiscal conservatives, who some are just sort of MAGA people, others I think are certainly are pro-Trump, but have real genuine concerns. You mentioned Thomas Massey. I would add Chip Roy to that list of somebody who has an actual principled objection to lots of these government spending bills and all the rest. One of the problems that Republican speakers, including the ones you have listed, run into is there are limits to what is politically possible. For example, when it comes to something like the debt ceiling, it is broadly agreed that a US default would be catastrophic for the American economy and for the world economy. That means you really can't let that happen, otherwise the blame that is going to accrue to you from the public is going to be massive. You can't just accomplish everything that the Chip Roys or the Thomas Masseys of the world want unless you had a much bigger majority. Therefore, it's just a fundamentally difficult job. All of that being said, it is obviously to Mike Johnson's benefit that he now has Trump's backing. It would have been very, very perilous for him had that backing been withheld. I'm not sure who Victoria Sparks is thinking wants the job, but if someone was perceived to be the Trump candidate other than Johnson, you wouldn't fancy Johnson's chances.
That would be fatal for him, as you point out. Again, I'm hearing rumblings about Jim Jordan, although Jim Jordan couldn't really put it together after McCarthy's speakership fell apart, so I'm a little skeptical. I've heard the name Byron Donalds floated more than once. Yes, you're right that there's not an obvious MAGA behind one other candidate who could potentially get the job, and that's working to Mike Johnson's advantage. We say it is a tough job. It's also like, I don't have all that much sympathy for him. He can just do it for a short amount of time and then go off and become some very wealthy lobbyist. Like, it will be to his personal benefit to
not,
have been the speaker.
It's not working down the salt mines, like I'm not saying that.
Right, with all those 11 and 12-year-olds.
Exactly. It's not been a child's chimney sweep, Robby. That's the main point. But in saying all of that, I mean, it's just very difficult to corral a Republican conference that still has people who do need to be mindful of the centre ground and, you know, the Chip Roys and Thomas Masseys of the world.
Sure, we'll have to see. Well, he will certainly be happy to have gotten that endorsement. Trump has backed Johnson quite a bit. I think, but if I'm trying to predict where Trump is thinking, I think Trump's thinking is he likes Johnson, he'll back Johnson, but he will also work with whoever if they decide ultimately to oust Mike Johnson, he will find a way to work with the kind of person who's going to get for it. It's not going to be there's no anti-Trump person left in the Republican Party. It's not going to be a stick-it-to-Trump person.
No, it's not going to be, you know, Mitt Romney is not going to be made speaker from outside the House.
I saw Ezra Klein, I just saw a tweet from him observing this, and I think there's something to this. You know, some people had predicted a more, that in the Trump second administration there would be less internal dissent because Trump has banished all dissent against him from the Republican Party. That's true, but now the dissent is more interesting. So the first time around, the dissent in the Trump administration, the infighting, the disagreement, it was between ardent Trump loyalists and people who were not ardently loyal to Trump, but were, you know, seeing how much they could survive in the party. They're all gone. That's done with. Now the infighting is actually, I think it's more ideological than it was the first time around. Like, we're seeing the argument over the visas. We're seeing debates between the more tech libertarian leaning and fiscal restraint people, debates between a more nationalist, national conservative sort of people who want more labor stuff, less immigration, who maybe don't want to have some of these showdowns on fiscal issues. You know, they're having all, and then there's people who are amalgamation of all that, RFK Jr. type people, dissenting voices on foreign policy. Marco Rubio is very different from Tulsi Gabbard, even though they're, you know, getting along for now. The arguments are going to be ideological in the second Trump administration, even in Congress, more so than over, do you like and love Trump personally? That bar's clear. Everybody's got to clear that bar or you're just not in the game anymore. Right. But having cleared that bar, now there are going to be debates about policy.
Yeah, and I think that's great. No, absolutely. And I think that the fact that there are really substantive differences, like we were talking about with the visa issue, like those are two fundamentally different worldviews, and that being contained within one party is genuinely interesting.
Do you think Democrats are going to learn any lessons from that?
I think probably not. Maybe in a little while, but not for the moment.
Love the honesty. More to come on Rising still today. Please stay with us. Are Americans avoiding the news? A recent AP University of Chicago survey found a majority of Americans want to take a step back from political news. Specifically, 65% of adults say that they need to limit news consumption due to information overload, fatigue, or similar reasons. When broken down by party, 72% of Democrats say they feel the need to avoid politics. 63% of independents reported feeling the same, compared to just 59% of Republicans.
That report means more bad news for left-leaning legacy media. MSNBC's primetime audience dropped 54%, and CNN's fell by 45% in the weeks after Election Day. Right-leaning media is faring better. For example, Fox News saw a ratings boost of 13%.
So I never want people to stop wanting to watch political news. We're a political news show. You got to stay plugged in all the time. Got to keep scrolling, keep looking for our videos. No, I think it is a good thing to take a back seat to step back and not just be consuming news or information all times. I think that does lead itself to information overload. And it is the case that now we in the news media business, we're TV news people, there's more competition for the average American's time and attention because there's a lot more ways to spend your time, even if we're just keeping in the category of things you watch, like on your phone or on your laptop. There's now lots more content, lots more good algorithmically derived videos. You know, I see when I log on to Instagram or Facebook or something, I'm shown a lot of short videos of TV shows I like. Then, you know, I've seen these clips 1,000 times. But yeah, I find myself watching it. It's a better way to, you know, spend your time while you're waiting for the elevator or whatever than reading maybe some boring news. So we have to up our game to compete in this new information ecosystem, and that's all fine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, let all the flowers bloom, so to
Yes.
speak, right? I do think that there is just a vastly expanded universe for political news. So it's not only a matter, obviously, of the cable networks. People can watch this show. People can watch lots of other primarily internet or digitally delivered shows. So it's not just, well, I watch, one of the big three cable networks or whatever. So that is a change. To me, the interesting thing about that poll is, on one hand, there is obviously a understandable disenchantment, particularly from liberal-leaning people who, feel that they just suffered a pretty crushing defeat, and therefore their appetite for political news is diminished. But then there's the broader question of whether the general paradigm of cable news and people just feeding constant sort of red meat outrage to a base is starting to get a little tired. And I do think that particularly among younger people and frankly more independent-minded people, that there is a greater impatience with that model. And, I think that's a perfectly good thing, actually. I think that the idea that a format in the sense of cable news that was born around 1996 to 1998 is, everything has its moment, and its peak has plainly passed because of things like cord cutting. And I just think that there's an increasing dissatisfaction with the overall product being offered.
Sure, and the situation with viewers not wanting to watch CNN and MSNBC as much anymore, is a little bit different from the situation I was outlining a moment ago. It's certainly a documented phenomenon at this point that liberal and progressive-minded people are dissatisfied specifically with those two options, are either not choosing to just consume news as vigorously as they were before, or are looking elsewhere to get their news fix, a mix of both. Whatever the product is that you're explicitly progressive in MSNBC's case, or centrist but really from a liberal ethos at CNN, the product they're delivering has, there's no way around it, has a shrinking market to some degree.
Yeah.
And there's still a healthy appetite on the right side for news and information from a generally right-leaning perspective. Now, it's why I think the whole, and also because of the competition, CNN used to be viewed very neutrally. You just have the TV on and you're getting updates on world affairs, and it's just kind of being,
you see it in the airport and things like that for that reason.
Right, neutral and fact-based. And of course, they still do some amount of that reporting, but I actually do think there's just less and less of an audience for that because people are going online to get their news from spicier, more provocative and confrontational people maybe like yours truly,
Sure.
I don't know, and the personalities we've featured on this show. So I think the future it's not now the neutral reporting, that kind of, it still does need to be delivered, but I think the best way to deliver it in the future will be, again, not to toot our own horns, but just to you have a variety of perspectives, and that way the viewers can decide for themselves who they agree with, rather than having everyone try to be neutral.
Yep.
Instead, we're admitting we're not neutral, but we have you and we have me and we have other people and we'll have guests from this way, that way, and everywhere in between. And that's how we arrive at how we correct for bias and try to arrive at neutrality and objectivity, not because we're pretending that we are literally neutral. We have ideologies, we have agendas, we have whatever, but we have a variety, and that way, that's the only way I can think to solve it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that, I will toot our own horn for a second. I think the genuine debate and genuine civil disagreement still has a place, and I think stepping away from political party talking points has a very important place, because I think if you look at the way politics is changing, a very large number of Americans are not, people just don't regurgitate party talking points all the time. And so television products that do that, by their nature, have a limited audience, it seems to me. Whereas if you can offer something a bit fresher and hopefully a bit more intellectually honest to people, then obviously we hope for our own reasons that there's a market for that. But more generally, I do think it is good for American civic life, not to sound too high-minded about it, if that takes place.
Yeah, and this is taking place every now and then on these networks I keep disparaging. I've liked a lot of the panel discussions CNN has had lately, including with some people who are very much have a different perspective from what viewers remain. But we might just be living at the low moment for the liberal mindset or thinking where I'm going to get my information from. I think liberals are a bit demoralized right now, not energized the way they were when Trump won the first time. Like, well, now we're going to resist. Now we're going to fight. They're very demoralized at this moment, but that could always change.
I do think the numbers will improve from where they are for both MSNBC and CNN. I am no fan of Fox, but I mean the numbers are extraordinary. In that AP article, the primetime audience of Fox is around 2.7 million, and MSNBC's roughly 600,000 and CNN's 400,000. I mean that disparity is enormous.
Yeah, I mean we have that many people watch our show in any given 24-hour period, so it's and we have not quite the same resources at our disposal as CNN and MSNBC.
Only a matter of time, Robby.
Only a matter of time. Well, if Elon buys MSNBC, I want to audition for Elon TV.
Elon TV all the way. I'll be out of a job.
No. We'd have you on all the time. It'd be great. Well, we're tooting our own horns, but there will be lots of tooting of horns tomorrow as New Year's Eve is celebrated. We will have one final show, one final episode of Rising for the year 2024. That's coming tomorrow. You won't want to miss it. In the meantime, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, now available anywhere you can get podcasts. See you back here tomorrow. Take care.